Weightlifting complexes can be a great tool to improve your technique, but which complexes work best for you and where do they fit into your program? In episode 67 of the Last Set Best Set podcast, Coach Calvin and I answer these questions and more. And if you love learning about Olympic weightlifting, getting strong, and building muscle, then make sure to subscribe. Welcome back to the Last Set Best Set podcast. I'm Coach Brian. I'm the owner of Big Ben Strength, and I've been teaching Olympic weightlifting for 11 years now.
And I am Coach Calvin, current captain of Lindenwood University's Olympic weightlifting program, as well as a coach through Big Ben Strength, and now a gym owner.
Today, we're going to be talking about progressing and programming weightlifting complexes. Calvin, what would you say are some good reasons to use weightlifting complexes?
I think there's two main ones that really come to mind as like the top two most used reasons. So the first one is you have some sort of technique issue that is like a know-how issue. So essentially, like, you don't know how to do this certain skill or move in this certain way, and this complex helps teach you to do it that way. This is something that you can learn. And then there's another kind of complex which more targets a physical quality, and that might be, for instance, like cleans plus front squats plus jerk, as it's more of a strength builder and a capacity builder kind of complex. So let's start. Let's go through some of the technical variations, I think, first, and talk about what those kind of look like.
Yeah. So with complexes that you're using to kind of reinforce your technique, there's a couple different ways that I like to do this, but my personal favorite is using variation complexes. So a variation complex would be pairing one variation of a competition lift followed immediately by that competition lift. We're doing this with the hopes that that variation teaches you an aspect of your technique that you can reinforce and hopefully see through on the competition lift. So an example of that might be something along the lines of like let's say like a hip snatch plus a snatch, right? For a lot of beginners, hip snatch plus a snatch is going to be really good for practicing leg drive, making sure that you're kind of keeping your bar path a little bit more vertical and not bumping the bar way out around in this big looping pattern, right? And then for more advanced lifters, that's going to help you kind of work on the same things, but primarily more about speed under the bar because you're limiting the amount of time that you have to create momentum in your pull in that hip snatch. And then you follow that up with the snatch immediately after. And this is really important, especially for lifters who feel like they need to feel the technique that we're trying to get them to do in the actual lift, right? So you do that hip snatch, you follow that up with a snatch, and hopefully you'll carry the technical practice that you get out of the hip snatch in the full snatch. So that's just one example. There's a ton of other examples of this here that I wrote down. I'll just kind of speed through some of these real quick. Another good one here is a snatch pull plus a snatch. You can practice the pull mechanics and hopefully get that to carry over into the snatch. I really like this, especially with a snatch high pull followed by the snatch, especially for athletes who have a really hard time keeping the bar close in the pull. Another good option, we could do something like a power snatch plus a snatch. I prefer this a little bit more for advanced lifters because it's going to help you kind of work on your pull height. And a lot of the time as beginners, pull height is not really a limiting factor for you technically. Most people tend to accidentally power snatch things way too often as a beginner. But as an advanced lifter or an intermediate lifter, a power snatch plus a snatch can be a great way to work on pull height, speed under the bar, and even kind of like bracing and meeting the bar tight and not letting that bar crash down on you as you're getting under it. So that's one good option. What are some other ones here?
Yeah, so a good one that I've actually used in the past for some of my athletes is a pause snatch plus a snatch. So that's great. We use that in our beginner 101 guide as one of the main variations. It's essentially the first time you're learning to snatch from the floor. This is what we use. So pausing at the knee, typically right in front of the knee, is good because that's where a lot of things can go wrong. A lot of athletes, they want to pause above the knee or too far below. I usually see above more often than not, though. But yeah, this is great. Most people can get some sort of benefit out of a pause snatch, I would say. Like,
absolutely.
Like,
I mean,
this one it isn't even necessarily super targeted. Like, almost everybody has some sort of little issue in their pull or as they round the knee. Like, so, work on your pull, work on those weak positions.
Yeah, and one place that I really like to pause on this, like I think the knee is a good one to pause at, but one that I think is a little underrated is pausing an inch off the floor.
Mm.
So especially like for me, a big problem I have is like my hips rising too early in the pull. I know a lot of people struggle with that. So pausing an inch off the floor to really keep your back position constant and not let your hips rise early. That's a really good one for feeling that leg drive too.
Yeah.
Um,
I like the
and
pause
then,
off the floor
yeah,
for people that kind of yank the bar off the floor and don't establish their tension well too.
that's a good one.
A lot of
And
people don't realize they do that.
And let's not forget that we could also, if some of your issues are just strictly in the catch, we can pause in the catch. And pausing in that catch is really going to help you kind of make micro corrections that you may not know are happening in your pull. Maybe you don't have a coach watching your lifts, or maybe you just don't know what to look for in the pull. Pausing in the catch will give you that kind of external feedback from the bar to tell you what you're doing wrong in your pull. And if you can't pause in your catch a lot of the time in the snatch, you're probably doing something wrong in the pull. But that pause will help you fix that without necessarily knowing what you're trying to fix in the pull. I found that to be pretty useful for sure.
Yeah. So before we get into some of the clean variations or talking about them, I think it's probably cool to address kind of how me and you almost approach complexes maybe a little bit differently. Because there are different approaches out there. And I'd say, Brian, like you probably use a lot more of the, variation plus full lift than I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot of times when I approach like a complex day, that's like its own day, that this is the exercise for that day, I'll do something completely different than the competition lift. Like it might be a power snatch, but that's as close as you're gonna get.
Yeah.
I try and like pull athletes, I guess, like away from the full lifts as much as I can on those days,
Mm-hmm.
unless we're closer to competition, and then they're having more specific
Yeah.
complex days on there. So
Yeah, 100%. And I think really that depends on who it's for, right? With
yeah,
I really like the variation complexes, but I think that those are great for a lot more general athletes, like beginner,
yeah,
intermediate level athletes, who maybe don't have the capacity or the strength to get all that fatigued from their Olympic lifts yet because their technique's just not that good yet. But then as you get more advanced, like a heavy snatch day or a heavy clean day, we joked about that. I think it was on the episode with Dr. Trevor Kim, where like if you do a max effort clean, it kind of feels like you got hit by a car the next day. Like it just feels awful if you're a really strong athlete. But if you're a beginner, you could do a max clean and feel completely fine the next day, right? And so for those types of people, I will use like I just don't think that they need quite as much of a down day after a heavier Olympic lifting session. And so for those kinds of people, I'll use complexes that are heavier on their we'll call it the high day, right?
yeah,
And those can be pretty effective, and that's something I found for sure.
yeah. Like if this person's snatch is 40% of their back squat or something, like they just doing a max snatch like does not take anything out of them.
Mm-hmm.
Then yeah, just throw more full lifts at them. That's something I've done with one of the beginners I'm working with lately. Like I remember like I was going to give him like a snatch day and then a snatch variation day. I was writing his program and I'm like, I'm just going to give him the exact same thing on both days. And it was double pause snatch plus snatch.
Mm-hmm.
I just gave him that twice a week. I'm like, you know what, this guy, he's new enough. It ain't gonna hurt him to work on the same thing twice. That might even help. It probably helps him more than it hurts.
One thing that I'm interested in, I may want to talk to a couple other people about this, but you know, when I'm teaching beginners, I try to remove kind of as many variations as possible and get somebody just more opportunities to practice a full lift as possible, as long as their technique is looking good, right? We'll move them through that full beginner progression that we have and then get them snatching from the floor as much as I possibly can. And so that may mean that they're doing a lot of the same like basic movements, but I think that they almost need that because they just don't have practice with the lift. But you see a lot of like more traditional progression, like programming styles, like I guess you'd call it Russian programming, right? Where they're starting off their career as weightlifters with beginners with a wide selection of exercise. They're using way more exercises and very rarely doing just competition snatch. And I'm curious to know. I may have to pick some people's brains on this, but I've noticed the opposite seems to be a little bit more effective with the population that I'm working with. But maybe that just means that we need to get them past that like pure beginner stage and move them into more increasing their competency with lots of different variations of the lift and lots of different exercise selections, right? So that's not actually a bad reason to use complexes that aren't variation complexes. We can use complexes that have maybe a lot of different exercises to get them familiar with more types of movements in the Olympic lift, right? You can increase their competency there. And so an example of that, like we talked about this with Greg recently, about how some athletes will start with a new variation that they've never done before, and they try it once or twice and they just dash it aside because they didn't find it to be all that effective. But a big part of using a new variation is you have to learn how to do the variation correctly and get enough reps in with it before it starts to become effective. So what you can do with these variations that are new to you is you can toss them into a complex that you're already doing to get practice with that movement. And then as you progress through a training block, you remove some of those other exercises and maybe you can push that variation a little harder now that you've got more practice with it without necessarily wasting a whole dedicated block of time in your session just working on this new variation that is probably not all that effective or stimulating for you yet.
Yeah, for sure. And let's kind of get into maybe some of the clean complex variations, because now most of these are pretty similar to the snatch, but I do have one comes to mind that I use that I use for a very specific issue. And so in the clean, when somebody has really bad crashing in the clean, I give them a cluster. This is something I've seen my coach do. And so basically the cluster is like a clean straight into a thruster, if you're familiar with the thruster from CrossFit. So essentially you're doing a clean straight into a push press almost, right? Full clean all the way to the bottom, and you're driving up tall and push pressing it at the top. And so what that kind of does is if you, one, don't have a full grip on the bar, that's going to be really hard to do. And then two, if you have to double bounce in the bottom, you're not going to have enough speed at the top to really push press that well. And so it will limit the weight a lot for someone who crashes, but for someone that has good connection to the bar, it actually doesn't limit them very much at all compared to a normal push press. And so,
that's a pretty good one. That I actually have used that as well for athletes who have a hard time being smooth into the catch for the squat, where if you're, sometimes people will do this thing where they can't squat, but that's because their hips are in the wrong position. Like they're sending their hips way too far back on their heels, or their hips are way too far forward on their like midfoot. And so they can't smoothly pass into the squat. Yeah. You do a cluster like that. That's a good way to work on that. So you could do like a cluster into a clean, right? Is a good option there.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like the one for a clean variation that I think differs from snatch, just because it goes straight into the push press or jerk kind of thing. So that's kind of a combo clean and jerk variation. Mm-hmm. But yeah, let's talk about maybe some of the jerk ones now.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the clean, right? Like most of those are going to be the same kind of variation complexes that you see in the snatch, right? We're going to basically do a clean from a different position, right? Like a hip clean or a hang clean. We could do a pull before we do a clean. We could do a power clean plus a clean. All those are basically going to be about the same, right? We could do a pause. We could do a hang or like a low hang or a floating clean before a clean. Those are all basically the same thing as the snatch. The jerk, essentially, we're looking at the same idea, right? We can pause in different positions. So we can pause in the dip. We can pause in the split. We could do that both, right? So a pause jerk plus a jerk, probably one of my favorites. We could do a slow dip jerk plus a jerk, right? A tempo jerk plus a jerk. Really good for working on timing of the dip and drive. Another option here, we could do like a power jerk plus a jerk. So this is similar to how we would use a power snatch plus a snatch or a power clean plus a clean. We're working on bar height. And then also bar path is kind of a little bit more of a factor here with the powers in the jerk, right? If you are If you're not able to move your feet forward, you can only move your feet out to the sides. It really forces you to have a constrained bar path in the jerk, and you're not going to be able to drive the weight forward as much, and certainly not be able to complete the lift if you do that. Tired of programming that doesn't work? Inconsistent technique, missing lifts, or going months without PRs is all signs that your program isn't working. If this is you, I'd like you to consider joining the OlyStrong team, my online weightlifting program available in 3, 4, and 5 days a week for weightlifters looking to dial in their technique, get strong, and most importantly, set PRs. Each week is structured to support the things all weightlifters need. Enough practice in the snatch and clean and jerk to dial in your technique, a consistent strength program to build big squats, pulls, and presses, and accessory work carefully chosen to build muscle that supports your Olympic lifts. The program uses logical progressions that focus on building momentum each week instead of just maxing out every week, or worse, only lifting light to work on your technique. If this sounds like something you need, then scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below for a free week trial today. All right, back to the show. And then one other one that I actually took from you use this one a little bit more, is push presses plus a jerk. This is a really good option for kind of practicing maximum leg drive, especially if you're doing the push press correctly. I think a lot of people maybe start pressing a little too early, but if you do the push press where you use your legs as much as possible and your arms only really help at the last little bit of lockout, that is going to carry over into your jerk really well if you're somebody who starts to press early in the jerk.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me, I don't know how I forgot about this one, but muscle snatch. Muscle snatch is one of my favorite variations. I essentially, here's my progression for teaching a beginner in person how to snatch. Online, it's a little different. It's a lot harder. It takes a lot more back and forth online to teach a beginner. It can be done. To go against popular belief, it can be done, but
it can be done.
But the muscle snatch, if you have someone in person and you can give them feedback there, oh my God, it teaches like the best bar path for the snatch. And so what I'll do is I'll take someone through, the standard pull positions, make sure they can do an overhead squat, make sure they can do, behind the neck snatch press. And if they're looking good, if they're kind of an athlete, I start them with a hip pull to teach them the power position. So it's kind of what we do in the Weightlifting 101 guide as well. Then I'll bring them down to the floor, as long as they're, you got to teach them to keep their elbows over the bar and not turn the elbows back, make sure they're pulling to the right height, teach them all those little things. Then I bring in the double pause pull. So, pause at knee. You got to teach them the floor position, of course, how to move from the floor to the knee. You might just work between there and there for 5 minutes. Then bring them into that hip position they already worked on. They should be good there. Maybe they need one reminder. And again, elbows over the bar in the pull. Then I'm going to have them do the tempo pull, and then I'll have them do a regular pull. Usually that can go pretty quickly, as long as somebody understands the positions they're supposed to be in. And that might be the entire session at that point. Like, we might spend that entire hour on just doing that in someone's first session. Then when they come back another time, we might start using the muscle snatch. So I'll bring them through the same pull progression, except it goes way quicker because they remember it. And then we're doing double pause muscle snatch. And there's so much to work on in the muscle snatch. And I just think it's such a foundational movement. But the only problem is it's so hard to teach to yourself. You're just not going to learn it yourself. If you don't have someone watching you, telling you how to do it, oh boy, you're in for some trouble.
Which is so funny because I've never said this out loud before, but I really hate the muscle snatch. I'm not a huge fan of it. Specifically for beginners. I think maybe it's just because I never learned the muscle snatch early in my development. And I never had somebody else teach me the muscle snatch. It was very much self-taught, watch a lot of videos, listen to, different people talk about how to do it. But I never really felt like I got much out of the muscle snatch. I think it's a fun exercise to go heavy on before you go into your normal lifts. But I don't normally do that for the same reason that I don't really teach power snatches or power cleans to beginners either. I think I think personally it's hard to get somebody to practice moving under the bar. but that's not what you're using it for. You're using it to like get a really tight bar path. And so muscle snatches do a great job of having a super tight bar path because your feet don't move. Your feet don't leave the ground. It doesn't allow you to jump forward, jump back. If the bar gets away from you, you're going to have no chance of making that muscle snatch. So it can be a really good tool for that. I personally will do something almost a similar reason for it is a no contact snatch. I really like that as one of those options for a constrained bar path. But that's just, I think, just differences in approach to using the muscle snatch based on like how we learned the lifts ourselves, you know?
And even like, I will run into some problems when you bring someone through an entire session of just working on the pull and the muscle snatch. When you try and get them to go to the power snatch after that, sometimes they struggle. Their brain can't put that together because they've been only up the entire time.
Yeah.
But if you have a decently kind of athletic person, if you're just like sit with it, like just sit, like they kind of get the idea.
Yeah.
And that's one that like if you're teaching maybe a former athlete in another sport, like this progression is probably pretty good. If you're teaching a master's lifter that has never lifted, no, I'm not doing this.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm probably just going to bring them through the regular thing. So it's always dependent on like who do you have in front of you? You know what I mean? Like what's like you kind of got to develop with Leo Totten was just talking about this on our last episode. You got to develop a bit of a coach's eye to just see like, without even, it's not something specific. It's not like, oh, are they hitting depth in the back squat with the upper back tight? Like, no, it's just like, there's like a certain movement quality that people have as you watch them warm up, as you watch them go through maybe the barbell warm up, right? And you just kind of can decide based off that. And you start like giving somebody something different. And it's just sort of a feeling rather than some set rules that you have in your head. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. And speaking of equality, I think let's go ahead and move into talking about some different types of complexes here. We talked about a quality complex, right? This is where we're trying to develop something that's not necessarily a know-how skill, but it's more an ability, right? It's an ability to do something. A lot of the time, this is a strength. A strength is that main quality, but sometimes it's speed under the bar. And so there's a couple different ones here. Quality complexes really are just, I find that they're a little bit simpler. They're usually less types, less amount of exercises in one of these complexes. And usually it's a lot more of multiple reps of one exercise or one or two exercises followed by another. So I'll give you an example here, right? If we wanted to work on speed under the bar by fatiguing your pull or your drive for the jerk, then we could do things like multiple pulls plus a clean or a snatch, right? 3 clean pulls plus a clean. 2 snatch pulls plus 2 snatches, something like that would be a great way to work on your speed under the bar if you're somebody who tends to really emphasize like maximum pull height. Another option there would be like multiple hang reps, multiple reps where you're going from the hang. We're doing this on the OlyStrong team right now, where we're doing 1 snatch plus 3 hang snatches or 2 hang snatches now on this block. This is a great way to work on your speed under the bar and not be quite as limited by some of the more technical aspects of the pull from the floor. And that's one option, right? And then for the jerk, we could do the same thing with multiple push presses plus a jerk. Like, maybe a training cycle might look like 3 push presses plus 1 jerk, and then the next block 2 push presses, and then the next block 1 push press plus a jerk. So those are some good options there. We've also got some different options for like making jerks under leg fatigue. This is probably my favorite approach for people who suck at the clean, but generally are pretty good at the jerk, but maybe they're just too fatigued to make the jerk well. So that would be something like multiple cleans plus a jerk, right? 3 cleans plus 1 jerk, 2 cleans plus 1 jerk are really good complexes. I always call those like a grit complex. But then you could also do something like out of the rack, maybe front squat plus a jerk, to kind of practice being able to be confident going into a jerk, knowing that your legs are tired, you still can do it, right? As long as you're being fast under the bar. So that's one good option. What are some other options here for quality complexes?
Yeah, I think like one of the ones that we kind of already talked about, but it has a different maybe application is pausing, right? So maybe you're doing a pause off the floor and a pause at the knee before going. And you could even just do 1 pause, but that might be more of a technical variation, right? But even just one pause is still a strength builder. It's still going to constrain your overall force production, right? That you're putting into this lift. If you don't have that momentum from the first pull, or maybe even from most of the second pull, say you're pausing at the hip. By the way, pausing at the hip, really hard variation for most people.
That's a tough one.
That'll really limit the weight on somebody. So if you want to hold them back on a lighter day, give them pause at the hip. But yeah, so you can do that in the clean or the snatch. I usually go with one pause, but a cool way to progress over time could be doing 2 pauses, then dropping down to the one most limiting pause, or taking away the most limiting pause so it gets heavier, and then taking it away completely in the final block. We'll talk about that a little more later on.
Yeah, this is something that I actually did on a program that we're going to have coming out soon, called the positional strength cycle. And so all we did on this was like first block, 3 pauses in the pull, second block, 2 pauses in the pull, and then the final block, 1 pause in the pull, before we have essentially the last block, which is like, let's test how well that worked out for you. And that was a cycle that we ran on the OlyStrong team, and it was fantastic. It was great. And then something else that you can kind of like, this might be a good visual for the weightlifting fans out there, but if you're trying to build some strength in that position, you can pause for a long time. Like imagine Klokov's 200 kilo pause snatch that was just a massive viral video where he paused at the knee for like, 7 seconds or something like that. It was ridiculous. And then snatched 200 in the training hall. I'll post the video. I'll include the video on this because it was crazy. But that's, it's going to work on your strength. You're going to be building strength in that position. But the other really beneficial moment to it is if you can snatch 200 kilos with a 5-7 second pause at the knee, you know dang well that whatever weight you put on the bar, you're going to get under it, because it's not going to be any harder talking yourself under that bar than pausing at the knee for 5 seconds is. Like that is for straight just confidence under the bar. That's a really good option too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that Klokov lift is nuts. You always see that's one of the ones. A lot of lifts are forgotten. A lot of big lifts are forgotten over time. That's one that's consistently reposted and referenced. Like that is, I've never seen anybody else really do a variation at 200 kilos or more in the snatch, right? Like,
really the only time that you see anything like that would be like lifts from the blocks with supers. I think you'll see like, if I remember correctly, I think Salimi did 215 from the blocks, or maybe he might have done 220 from the blocks. I'm not 100% sure on that. But I remember it was like one of the only videos of like 220 snatches in existence before Lasha hit 225 and 220 in competition.
Speaking of block lifts, let's talk about what their place is within, the variation kind of scene.
Yeah.
Where do you use blocks, or when do you use them?
Pretty rarely, honestly. Now that doesn't mean that they're not effective. We just don't have a great setup for them in our gym. And with online stuff, I'm really not really going to program blocks unless it's for a custom person who has that option. And so I don't really use blocks all that often, but they can be a really good option for a few different reasons, right? If we're doing high rep Olympic lifts, so on the cycle that we're on right now for the OlyStrong team, if I was in person with somebody following this, they would be doing all that. We did a block of 1 snatch plus 4 hang snatches. I would be doing that in person with somebody where it'd just be a set of 5 snatch from the blocks instead of, pulling from the floor, doing from the hang, right? Yeah. I think high rep Olympic lifts are a great reason to use blocks. We can also use those to reinforce technique from certain positions. So let's say that you have bad technique from the knee, where you have a tendency to lean your body back way too far as your only movement. You're not pushing through the floor with your legs. So then we could do a lot of reps around the 80% range from the knee position off the blocks. That's a really good option for people too.
Yeah, if you have done, a volume program where you have sets of 4 or 5 on a clean or a snatch, how much that lights up your lower back because of all that pulling off the floor. So if you still want to hit, maybe you're a more advanced lifter, who's probably not doing sets of 4 or 5 off the floor, very heavy, because it limits you so much. Going from the blocks, great idea. I
Yeah.
like that. I'll give it to lifters if I really want to pull them back on a day. Like I want them doing, let's say, like block power snatch doubles, like light. Like it's going to be a lot less fatiguing per se than doing power snatches from the floor. They're just not working on that floor position. It gives them a little more rest. Which again is kind of like a theme, like Brian said, that you'll notice in my programming is I'm always using complexes as a way to like hold people back from going heavy or recover them for the bigger days. So I really apply that kind of high-low method we've talked about in our other programming videos. The complexes are how I get that low.
Yeah.
Especially for those athletes that love to push the RPE and lie to themselves about how heavy they're actually going.
One other good option, though, for the block is actually if I've got an athlete who needs to work on their deadlifting, and we're doing a lot of pulling and deadlifting, and their back is lit up, I'm going to have them do most of their lifts from the blocks during that cycle because we've got a strength exercise we really need to push. We don't want to have we don't want to have to pull back their Olympic lifts so far because of the fatigue in their back. So that's another good option too for anybody. If you need to work on your deadlift and get your pull strength up, try doing your Olympic lifts from the block for that training cycle where you get the most fatigue. So maybe that's the first like high volume block in that where you're doing lots of tens or something like that in the deadlift. That might be a good idea for you.
Yeah, for sure. And then let's talk about maybe there's another two kind of like side or little reasons. So to recap, we talked about doing technical practice for complexes, where we can use it as a primer or in the warm up immediately before doing a lift, or we can use, a variation plus the full lift right away. So we call that the variation complexes. Then we kind of talked about doing more quality building quality complexes that are developing that maybe strength, right? But there's kind of two other little reasons. So the first one is going to be working around pain and injury. So I saw a funny video. It was from KDOT, from Chris Speed, who we recently had on the podcast. And he was talking about, your favorite lifter does this variation. Okay, well, they're hurt. Your favorite lifter squats once a week. Okay, well, yeah, that's because back squats give them crazy pain and they have to modify. And so a lot of the times, especially advanced athletes programs are highly tailored to what injuries and pains they are going through or tend to go through. And so choosing those variations, being smart with yourself, like knowing that if you're cleaning from the floor multiple times a week, your back's going to flare up or something like that, right, is really important. And so, that's why you see a lot of lifters maybe picking weird complexes and you're like, that's so weird. Like, why are they doing, only block powers, for the last 2 months? That's all I've seen from them. Well, they might be hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fair point, right? One that really comes to mind a lot is with longer torso lifters. Their back's just going to naturally get lit up more often by normal weightlifting training, especially pulling from the floor, because it's just a longer lever, right? It's more stress on the lower back than somebody who's got a shorter torso. And so for them, maybe instead of doing that complex we talked about for the quality complex, like 3 cleans plus 1 jerk, maybe it's 1 clean and then 2 front squats plus a jerk. And it's a great way to get the same stimulus of leg fatigue, right? And practicing making jerks under fatigue, but without the fatigue being specifically in your back and more being in the legs, right? Which is what will actually happen when you get up to those heavier weights for those longer torso lifters. So that's one good option, right? And that's not necessarily for injury or pain. It might just be an individual difference. You know that as a longer limbed lifter, if you do too much pulling from the floor, it is gonna hurt your back. So you're not doing this because you're in pain. You're doing this because you've discovered that if you do that, you will be. And so that's something to keep in mind there. Another big benefit of doing complexes is that it can be an interesting way to introduce novelty for lifters who are burnt out or who get bored easily. And that's, as much as we want to say as coaches, like you got to be so locked in. You got to be okay with doing whatever it takes to be great. But we also have to recognize that people's psychology around their training is what keeps them in the sport long enough to get good. And so if you are somebody who just needs a little bit more novelty, complexes are a great way to do that because, frankly, like you don't really know what is going to happen on the complex. You don't have expectations set for it for what you can do for a somewhat of a crazier complex, right? If it's got 6 exercises in it, you have no idea what you're going to be able to do. And that can almost be a little freeing and engaging for athletes who have just kind of been in a rut for a long time with their training.
Yeah, absolutely. Those lifters that maybe get really upset when they're not hitting 90% on the weekly, they think their training's worthless, if they're not up in that 90%, that's a good thing. Maybe don't even have them do the full lifts. Maybe just have them do some variations on their main days. And this might, like you said, they have like a reference max for, oh, my clean and jerk is this number. And if I'm not hitting near that number, I'm a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you bring, in that situation, maybe doing some, something totally different from the clean and jerk, right? It's limiting you so much. We're doing, a floating power clean plus push press plus power jerk, right? Well, okay, they don't really have, they know push press. They're not going to push press their clean and jerk. So, that's going to be good for them. Or even just, power clean plus power jerk. Most people don't have a max in their head for like what they're capable of on that they're going to be beating themselves up over not getting near. Mm-hmm. So, and then just like novelty for novelty's sake. Like that's what I talk about with when I use complexes a lot is like I said, I'm trying to take them away from those main movements. I don't want them doing full snatch or full clean and jerk as much. Mm-hmm. And that way, when I do start introducing it more, right? When I do start introducing the more specific variations, it has more of an effect. Because through your whole volume and strength phase, you weren't doing the Olympic lifts, say we weren't snatching 4 times a week. If you go from snatching 4 times a week to snatching 4 times a week, but heavier, it's less of a difference or less of a adaptation you're stimulating compared to doing from 2 times a week snatch to 3 during your strength phase to 4 during your peak. We're really trying to shift everything and have bigger, hills and valleys in your training, as opposed to training looking more similar year round, right? So I love bringing people back to foundations or back to, more simple variations, and doing less frequent, maybe Olympic lifting in their off seasons. So yeah,
for sure. And then this is the last thing really is like complexes can be a great option for people who are getting back into training. Like maybe you've taken a little bit of time off, you want to get back into training. It's a good option for people because it's novel, it's new, it's going to get them to feel like they're working really hard without actually having a whole lot of intensity to ramp up to. It's a good option for people getting back into it. So let's go ahead and talk now about how we kind of fit complexes into a week of training. Hobby weightlifters and competitors training might seem the same, but there's one big difference. Competitors need to hit their best lifts on the competition platform. It doesn't matter what you did in training if you can't perform when it counts, and your program should reflect that. Instead of following random programming, maxing out all the time, and hoping for the best on game day, our Competition Strong Team program focuses on long-term progressions that set you up to have your best competition day yet. Each training cycle is carefully designed around the USA Weightlifting National Circuit, so you'll hit your biggest lifts at the Arnold, the American Open Series 2, and of course, the National Championships. If you're ready to take your training to the next level and get platform ready, then click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on the screen for a free week trial today. All right, back to the show. A couple different ways to do this, right? I think really we're going to look at first is knowing what our anchor days are and what our lighter days are, what our high and low days are. And most programs we're looking at the high days are going to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday, Wednesday, Saturday a lot of the time. Most people rest on Thursdays and Sundays. That's not always the case, but those are your anchor days. Those are your higher intensity days. You want to know which days those are. And then your lower intensity days are typically that Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, something along those lines are usually lower intensity days for people. So I personally really like putting quality complexes as our main anchor lift for those higher days, right? So that means that maybe we're doing like snatch pull plus a snatch on Monday, and then Friday maybe we're doing 2 cleans plus a jerk, or 1 clean plus 3 jerks, and we're going to push that complex for a top set on our anchor day each week for 3 or 4 weeks of the block, right? With lighter complexes or with variation complexes where we're trying to work on technique, we can kind of fit those anywhere, right? If the exercises that we're using are inherently limiting, like a hip snatch or like a snatch with a pause in the hip, maybe that's going to be a little bit more of a lighter complex. We'll put those on our down days, on our lower days. But if we've got something like a snatch pull plus a snatch, or a clean plus a front squat plus a jerk, we can push those hard. And so I'm going to usually put those on our heavier anchor days. What are some other ways that you'll use this here?
Yeah, honestly, I'm a little more simple in my approach, right? I have my main days, those high intensity days. Those, say it's one main, say we're in a strength block. We have a main snatch day and a main clean and jerk day. There's a third day that I may be pushing, say somebody has more of a snatch weakness. There'll be a third high intensity day where I'm pushing snatch in some way again, but probably a variation, depends. Might be full of snatch again. So these 3 main days, and before that, they will have a priming complex. This is specific to what their weakness is.
Yeah.
And then they just, that's done with the first, maybe 3 to 5 warm-up sets. They're doing tall jerks, they're doing muscle snatches, they're doing snatch pull plus snatch in their warm-up. So I kind of throw all sorts of things around to just play around with it. Let's see if this works. Oh, it didn't work. All right, let's try something else. So that's a very communicative thing with my athletes. That's a way I try to get them involved in their training. Like, what do you think would help best prime you for this, technical error? And they seem to like that. But yeah, the main way I like push complexes in the traditional sense, where you're really loading them up, is on those, say in a 5-day a week training program. We have 3 main days. Those 2 other days are going to be some kind of complex in my training programs. So usually it's limiting you a lot, right? If it's a clean and jerk complex, it'll have some kind of push press early in the training cycle. Maybe it's more like power jerk or pause and split jerk towards the end. On the snatch variations, it really depends on, what their weaknesses are. As those are a little more technical, right? So those will be all over the board. From what we discussed before, it could be a muscle snatch. It could be snatch pull plus snatch. It could be some overhead work if somebody has an overhead weakness. Maybe it's pausing in the pull. Maybe it's tempo snatches. There's so many options, right? So it really depends on that athlete's weakness. We can talk about probably some more general progressions as well. So these are the ones maybe that we throw into our programs, like I have my front squat program, my back squat program, my high volume program. So these are like progressions that you might see in those programs. So we'll kind of go over how to progress them real quick. Yeah, normally 3-part complex into 2-part in the next block, into 1 part in the final block. That's a pretty standard way to do it. You can also go 4, 3, 2. That makes a little more sense for instance, like a clean and jerk movement. And yeah, I'll let you kind of riff on that a little bit more, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to progressing complexes, like really, I kind of look at this as like there's a two different ways to really do this, right? We can do where we remove exercises throughout the block, right? We can do something like for the snatch, we'll do maybe a snatch pull plus a hip snatch plus a snatch. We're working on pulling mechanics, we're working on leg drive, we're working on speed under the bar, right? That block 1, we're going to do 1 of each. Block 2, maybe we'll do a snatch pull plus a snatch. We're removing a limiting exercise, the most limiting exercise. And it's also the one that maybe we need the least amount of practice with. So that would be removing the hip snatch. We'll do just a snatch pull plus a snatch in that second block, and we're going to continue to push that lift, right? And then finally, that block 3, maybe we'll remove that snatch pull completely and just have snatches, right? We can progress complexes across a training cycle to not be a complex by the end of it. That's one option there, right? And if you want it to be a complex by the end of it, maybe you're not ready to push for a max on the snatch. You could do 2 snatch pulls, 1 hip snatch plus a snatch, block 2, 2 snatch pulls plus a snatch. And then block 3 is 1 snatch pull plus a snatch, and work up to try and hit a PR on that complex. That's one really good option. Let's say for the jerk, here's one good option, right? We could do a push press plus a power jerk plus a jerk. We're working on leg drive as much as possible. And we're also going to have a little bit of a practice with keeping a constrained bar path, keeping that bar close to the body and not letting it drive away from you. And then the next block will remove either the push press or the power jerk. A lot of the time I'm going to remove that push press. And so we'll do one power jerk plus one jerk. And then the final block will remove the power jerk and just do the jerk. And let's see how well this complex actually improve your technique in the jerk after that, right? So that's a good option there. What about for the clean and jerk here?
Yeah, so when I approach clean and jerk progressions, even with like people that have pretty limited technique variations, there's not that snatch. There's like a lot that you can do, I feel like. Clean and jerk, I'm a lot more simple in my approach when it comes to progressing a complex. And almost always I'm keeping push press in the beginning of a phase. So that would come before a jerk variation and after a clean variation, obviously. So a lot of times, depending on someone's technical issue, I'm doing some form of power clean. Maybe it's a hang, maybe it's from the floor, maybe it's from the blocks. And then push press. If somebody has problems in their dip, I might do a pause in the dip of that. I might do a tempo in the dip of that. But in general, I'm going to progress from a, clean plus some kind of jerk or push press variation into a jerk. But we have a kind of standard progression that we might use. I know, Brian, you use this one a lot in some of your programs, like it might be in the OlyStrong team program. I know you were doing a lot of hang work in that maybe recently, right? And so that might look like a clean plus 2 hang cleans plus a jerk, progressing to 1 clean plus 1 hang clean plus 1 jerk, right? To 1 clean plus 1 jerk in the final block. And you might do that on your main day, right? On your like, I guess like that high day, right? Like this is the high intensity push variation. So that's kind of the difference there is like maybe I'm using something as the down day. That's why I'm keeping the push press in or doing the more limiting variation. Whereas you might be pushing this one as like, and I'd say your way is probably more traditional to what a lot of coaches I see do. I do see a lot of coaches pushing like longer complexes as the main variation.
Yeah, I think that it can be a good option. I'll say I probably am very rarely going to do a long complex as the main variation. Most of the time I try to keep the total number of exercises at about 3 at most. Personally, for me, if I'm doing complexes, if I have more than 2, I can't focus. That was something when you started coaching me last year, and you gave me a complex one day that had like 4 different exercises on it. And I was like, I can't even remember what the next one is going to be. And so we had a rule. It was like 2 lifts if we're going to do a complex. And that personally just helps me out.
ADHD.
The ADHD got me. And so those are all kind of some good options there. And I like to push complexes. I think, especially with quality complexes, or I mean, I'll do it with both, honestly. A really good option, which we haven't really talked about, is using this kind of progression here, rather than just progressing it across a block, is to progress that complex within a session itself. So maybe what we'll do, I first saw this on, I think it was like youthweightlifting.com or something like that, when I was trying to learn how to coach a bunch of high school kids. And they would do something similar where it'd be like 3 exercises in a complex. We might do something like a pull plus a clean plus a jerk, and a pull plus a hang clean plus a clean plus a jerk. You'd work up, maybe do 3 sets of that, and then you would drop the hang clean, and you would do the 1 clean plus a pull plus a jerk, right? And then the final exercise would be just a clean and a jerk. And so this is a great way to get a lot of reps in, a lot of physical competency with lots of different movements for younger lifters in. And also just it's a great warm up, honestly, before they get into their lifts, and they're priming their technique a lot more. And it's not often all that fatiguing for them. And so they can still get high quality clean and jerks by the end of that.
So you bring up using this for youth, and I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Here's where in my when I'm coaching one-on-one athletes, typically, here's how I kind of fit into my training calendar. So when we think about the goal of, say, like a emphasis like phase, right? Like we have volume phase, strength phase, and then maybe like a peaking phase, right? So in the volume phase, it's just to accumulate work capacity, be able to handle more work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't typically use this in that phase. I'll use just like high reps of one variation, or maybe 4-part complexes, and just they're doing all their work in the 4-part complex, right? Then in the strength phase, in the beginning phases when the volume is higher, same thing, right? But it's like maybe less. Maybe it's only 3-part, 2-part, 1-part throughout a 9-week cycle or whatever.
Yeah.
When somebody's getting to the end of a strength phase and starting to transition into their peak, say we're pulling back on accessories a little, they don't have 5 sets on the first week of their program. They maybe only have 3 sets of accessories. We're freeing up more energy to be used on the Olympic lifts. We're starting that transition into almost like total Olympic lift focus, right? That's when I start putting these in, because I want people to be hitting heavier percentages off more often. So I want someone working up to, let's say, arbitrary number, but 80% or more on a main lift, essentially every day that they're doing an Olympic lift. So obviously they're doing that on their main days, but even on their complex days, not on their first, 3-part complex, but then maybe when they get to the 2-part, they're at 75%. And when they get to the 1-part, they're at that 80% or above kind of threshold. And I love using ranges when I program these too. So I'll think about when I'm writing a program, okay, on week 3, if I want someone to be hitting around in, 75 to 80% power snatch, which should be a maximal power snatch, I got to start them at, say, 65 to 70%. So it progresses there. And basically, I will use that as a transition into their peak phase, which in the peak phase, then I flip it up and everything is going into these main heavy days, big Monday, big Friday. And those technical variations are pulled back quite a lot. It's just a rest day, basically. It's like a recovery day. Yeah.
I like that. And that, I've actually done something, I think if I'm following you correctly here, I've done something similar with volume strength peak cycle, where we do something along the lines of like, and this would be like a small, we'll call it a 9 or a 12-week cycle, not talking like a full massive like macro cycle when we're talking about volume strength and peak. So what I'll do is I'll do something along the lines of like a high rep complex for quite a few sets, and then build up to just a normal single snatch in the competition lift, right? Or a clean and jerk in the competition lift after you get volume in at the complex, right? And so we'll start that first block with a higher rep complex. And then the second block, we'll do the exact same thing. We'll make that complex a little easier with less reps, right? And so we'll still get some more volume in at that complex, and then do a heavy single after that. Mm-hmm. And the singles that you're hitting in that second block, because you don't have quite as much fatigue because of just the total amount of work that's happening before you test it, you're going to hit heavier lifts, right? And then the final block will pull that complex way down. And so maybe it's only, maybe it's just pull plus a clean plus a jerk, right? We'll do a couple sets of that and then build up to heavy single after the complex. And that is a really interesting way that I've used complexes as essentially like a primer and getting volume work in while still hitting a heavy single afterwards, which I do think can be valuable for people to do in lots of periods of time in their whole training cycle. And it still follows the same principles of high volume in the beginning of a cycle and higher intensity at the end of the cycle, but we're still getting the chance to hit some heavier lifts. It just so happens that when you use a higher rep complex for multiple sets in the beginning of a cycle, the single that you hit is going to inherently be lighter than the singles that you'll hit at the end of that 12-week cycle, where the complex is a lot easier to manage.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, maybe a newer coach might listen to all this. We just threw so much at them, right?
Yeah.
There's so many different ways. But the important part, and you maybe even can, the listener can even take this away. Like me and Brian do stuff differently. Like we have different systems that we employ. But the important part is we know that system that we're following. When we start that training calendar with that athlete, we know pretty much the progression we're going to take them through. And obviously this is based on either of our experiences working with different levels of athletes and that kind of thing. But the most important part is that you have a system that you know you're going to bring someone through, and you're not just shooting in the dark with what you give them. So
Amen.
we mentioned, like, I don't know, 10 different ways you could use a complex, right? Pick one, right? Pick one that you're going to use. See how it works. If you think it works good, keep doing it. If it doesn't work good, try another way.
And even more importantly, before you pick one, have a reason, right?
Yeah.
So you always have to go back to like the first thing when you're programming stuff is what problem are we solving?
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is, I mean, basic scientific method, right? What is the problem that we want to solve? What's the hypothesis? We think that this is going to work. Why do we think that this is going to work? Okay, now, if we have enough logic says that this is going to be a good idea for them, then let's go ahead and test it out and see how it goes. And maybe you don't need to commit for a full training cycle on something like this. Maybe you do the first session and you're like, that was actually not what I needed to do at all for this lifter, and we need to switch it up completely, do a different thing. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
Experiment, and then once you get something that sounds like it's going to work, then you go ahead and make it a full progression, right? And then you implement it into the program.
Yeah, that's kind of how we tie all of this back together. Because like I said, there's so many different ways you could use variations in the snatch, the clean, the jerk. If you can simplify it somehow in your head, literally sit down, piece of paper, open up a blank Google Doc and type out a progression you're going to use. Plan it. You have to, periodize this stuff for your athletes. Like, especially if they're paying you to do, like, that's your job, Your job isn't to shoot in the dark and like pick something that, you think will work in this block and then just pick something else the next block. Like, have a plan, deviate from that plan if you are given a reason to, right? Oh, this athlete is not responding in the way I thought they did, but have a plan in mind, right? And even like, I think it shows a lot to communicate that plan to the athlete. Hey, here's the progression I thought about bringing you through. What do you think? And a lot of athletes are just going to be like, yep, whatever you say, coach. Like, which is fun, but maybe some are going to have some input to that. So that's a cool way to approach, like, when you're actually writing out, what your complexes are going to be. I like to use the complexes, whereas a coach, I might have more control over, the progression schemes that they're doing through them, or the overall periodization, what phases they're going through. I like to use the complexes to give the athletes a little bit of maybe choice, right? They get some input in their training program. They feel more engaged and involved in their program. And a lot of times that makes somebody enjoy training more when they're not just told what to do. But in fact, they felt like they had a, contribution to helping out while you're still giving them, all the valuable, coaching insight that you've developed over years of coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's really well said. I think they're a great way to get the athlete involved in the programming a little bit more. It's always good. If the athlete is more involved, they're going to feel like they have, it's going to feel like they have more ownership over their training. They're going to be more engaged with it, because they helped write it. And so the complexes are a great way to kind of maybe start building that relationship with your athlete if you're a coach listening, and to try different things.
That's a mistake I made early on. Like, I was just like, this is what it is. We're doing it. And if they asked why or they didn't like it, I'd be a little offended. Oh, well, like, this is what I think will work, so you're going to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Listening to your athletes usually leads to something good. You always get those kind of frustrating athletes that always know better, right? They know better than coach, but you kind of have to identify, okay, when do I give some and when do I pull them back from having some autonomy in here? That might be with how often they're doing it, right? If they're asking for changes every block in their complex and like they're just writing their own program, you might have to have a talk with them to be like, hey, like, I think we need to focus on this. This is the long-term plan. I think we need to follow this. But, like I said, every athlete's different. That's another big theme that, to tie in everything we talked about. Every athlete is a little bit different and needs a little bit different of an approach. If you're programming them one-on-one, there's a lot of really great progressions you could take away from what we said in here that are just general. But like we said, have a reason for why you're using it. Pick one because of something. Yeah.
100%. And so if you guys made it this far, let us know in the comments what your favorite complexes are, or maybe some ones that you think were just absolutely great complexes that we just did not talk about at all. Let us
Yeah.
know in the comments what those are. We'll maybe give those a try. And if you need help figuring out a complex for your specific technique issue, let us know in the comments, and I'll give you some recommendations there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
DM,
think that's going to wrap it for this week's episode. Calvin, you
yeah.
got something?
Yeah. DM me a video of your lift and I'll send you a complex. That'll help you.
Oh,
How about that?
opening up the floodgates here.
If you listened this far, you can DM me a video of your lift and I will recommend a complex for you.
Hey, you've earned it. You've earned it. And because you've earned it, you might as well leave a 5-star review for us if you're listening on Spotify or Apple. It really helps us out. And if you guys are really interested in helping us support the show, right? Grab some programs. We've got a ton of program options linked in the description below. It really helps us support the show, get more high-level athletes and coaches on so you can learn more about their training. And if you guys want to do that, you can find those linked in the description below. We'll catch you guys next week. Bye.
Bye. If you found this video helpful, then make sure to check out this video here or this episode of the Last Set, Best Set podcast.